The man who helps Richard with his little business. That's what she called me, Richard's mother. Standing under string lights at his 15th anniversary party, champagne in one hand, the other resting on my shoulder like I was a waiter she was about to tip. I noted it, the way you note weather before a storm. I didn't correct her. I didn't explain that Richard's little business had done $14 million in revenue last year, or that my name was on the incorporation papers right next to his, or that I'd mortgaged my house in year 2 so we could make payroll. I just smiled, nodded, and excused myself to get another drink I never drank. That was the last time I would ever let anyone in that family describe me in the past tense of my own life. My name is Daniel Voss. I'm 46 years old, and for 12 years I was the co-founder. Not the employee, not the assistant, the co-founder of a specialty logistics company called Harrow Voss Freight Solutions. I met Richard Harrow in a community college parking lot in our 20s. Both of us driving delivery routes for a company that didn't know our names. He had the charm. I had the spreadsheets. Between the two of us, we had exactly one idea worth anything. Regional freight companies were bleeding money on route inefficiency, and nobody smart enough to fix it wanted to work that hard for that little glory. I wanted the glory less than I wanted the win. That should have told me something. For 12 years, I built the operations side of that company from a shared laptop and a card table in my garage into a fleet of 81 trucks and a warehouse network across 3 states. I wrote the software that routes every truck. I negotiated every major carrier contract. I hired and fired the entire logistics team. Richard was the face, the golf games, the client dinners, the handshake in front of the cameras when we hit our first 10 million in annual revenue. I was fine being the engine instead of the hood ornament. For 12 years, I was fine. I skipped my father's 80th birthday for a client emergency in year 4. I missed my daughter's 8th grade graduation for a warehouse fire in year 7. I took a salary 20% below market rate for the first 5 years because Richard said we needed to reinvest in growth, and I believed him because I believed in the company more than I believed in myself. I didn't know it yet, but belief without a contract is just a very expensive form of trust. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, settle in, and let me tell you what happens when the smartest man in the room finally stops explaining himself and starts filing paperwork. This one's a long one. It's worth it. Stay until the end. The small disrespects started so early I stopped noticing them, which was the whole point. At the company's 5th anniversary, Richard gave a toast to the vision that built this place and never said my name once. I told myself he was nervous, that he forgot, that it wasn't personal. At the 10th anniversary, a trade magazine ran a profile calling him the mastermind behind Harrow Freight's meteoric rise. The word Voss appeared nowhere in a 1,400-word article about a company with my name in its legal title. I sent him the article. He said, "Yeah, that's not great, I'll talk to them." He never talked to them. His wife, Carol, started referring to me as Richard's operations guy at social functions. Not unkind, just diminishing the way you'd describe a good mechanic. His mother, Eleanor, was worse. Eleanor had never once, in 12 years, asked me a single question about my life. Not about my divorce. Not about my daughter's college acceptance. Not about the 11-hour days I logged while her son played 18 holes with prospective clients I'd already closed. I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters later. In year 3, when we were hemorrhaging cash and Richard wanted to fold, it was my idea, and my signature on a home equity loan, that kept the company alive through the winter. Richard signed nothing. Richard risked nothing. Richard's name is on the door because his uncle owned the original warehouse we started in, and somewhere along the way, that accident of geography became the entire story people told about who built this company. At year 11, during a partner restructuring meeting, Richard suggested, gently, reasonably, the way he suggested everything, that maybe it was time to formalize roles more clearly going forward. I asked what that meant. He said something about him handling external strategy and me handling internal execution. I said that was already what we did. He said, right, exactly, just making it official. I didn't push. I should have pushed. That was the last time I would ever let a conversation about my own company happen without a lawyer in the room. The anniversary party was Eleanor's idea. 15 years of marriage, held at the Harrow family's lake house, 200 guests, a live band, the whole production. I paid for half of it without being asked, the way I paid for half of everything involving that family. because keeping the peace had become a full-time unpaid position I'd apparently held since year one. Eleanor made the rounds with a fresh glass of champagne, introducing Richard to a cluster of guests I didn't recognize. Clients, maybe, or friends of Carol's family. I was standing 3 feet away when she gestured toward me and said the words that ended 12 years of patience in 4 seconds. And this is the man who helps Richard with his little business. Little. 12 years. 81 trucks. $14 million. A home equity loan that still had 6 years left on it. A daughter's graduation I missed for a warehouse fire that saved this company's biggest contract. Little. Nobody in that circle corrected her. Richard, standing right there, laughing at something a guest had said, didn't correct her either. He heard it. I know he heard it, because his eyes flicked to mine for exactly 1 second before he looked away and kept laughing. I didn't make a scene. I've never made a scene in my life, and I wasn't going to start at somebody else's anniversary party. I finished my drink. I found Carol and thanked her for a lovely evening. I found Richard and shook his hand and told him 15 years was a real accomplishment, which it was, and I meant it, which surprised even me. Then I drove home, sat down at my kitchen table at 11:40 that night, and opened a drawer I hadn't opened in almost 9 years. Part 6, The Decision. Inside that drawer was our original partnership agreement, signed in a lawyer's office in year 3, back when the company had 11 employees and a single leased warehouse, and Richard had needed my home equity loan more than he'd ever needed anything else in his life. Buried in Section 9, subsection C, was a buyout trigger clause. Neither of us had ever spoken about it again after signing. It stated, in language a lawyer had written and I had fully understood and Richard almost certainly had not reread since, that either partner could initiate a mandatory buyout of the other's shares if the initiating partner had contributed disproportionate operational value for a sustained period, as determined by an independent valuation. It required 90 days notice. It required documentation. It had been sitting in that drawer for 9 years, waiting for a reason. I didn't decide anything that night out of anger. Anger is loud, and I have never once been loud. I decided it out of arithmetic. I had built 80% of what made that company valuable and been described in public as the man who helps. The gap between those two facts wasn't an insult anymore. It was a business problem. Business problems get solved. I made myself a coffee. I read the clause 4 times. I didn't know it yet, but that clause, dormant for 9 years, was about to become the most valuable sentence either of us had ever written. Monday morning, before Richard had even arrived at the office, I called Marisol Chun, a business attorney I'd used twice before for contract review and never for anything this large. I told her I wanted to initiate the buyout clause. She asked if I was certain. I told her I'd been certain for about 9 years and just hadn't known it. We spent 6 weeks building the case, quietly, methodically, the way I'd built everything else in that company. Marisol pulled 12 years of operational records. Every route I designed, every contract I'd negotiated, every crisis I'd solved without Richard in the room. An independent valuation firm assessed my operational contribution at 78% of the company's demonstrable value creation. Richard's contribution, largely relationship-based and front-facing, was real but nowhere close to proportional to his 50% ownership stake. I delivered the 90-day notice on a Tuesday, by certified mail and by hand, in a manila folder placed on his desk before he'd taken his coat off. No shouting. No confrontation. Just the clause, the valuation, and a cover letter that said, in 4 sentences, exactly what was about to happen and exactly why. Richard called me 11 minutes after opening it. I let it go to voicemail. I want you to hold on to that detail because it matters later. I had spent 12 years always picking up on the first ring. That was the last time I would ever do that automatically. The 90 days were procedural, methodical, almost boring. Marisol handled the valuation dispute. Richard's attorney contested the 78% figure and got it negotiated down to 69, which was still enough. I financed the buyout through a combination of retained earnings I'd quietly built into a separate operational reserve fund over the previous 4 years. A fund Richard had never once asked about, because asking about operations wasn't his department, and a business acquisition loan that closed 19 days before the deadline. On day 91, I owned 100% of Voss Freight Solutions. I kept the name, Richard's name, I decided a long time ago that erasing him wasn't the point. Being accurately remembered was. Richard called 14 times in the first month. I answered twice, both times briefly, both times about operational handoff items that were contractually required. Eleanor called once, left a voicemail that started with "I don't understand why you do this to family," and I let that sentence sit in my phone for 3 days before I deleted it. Unanswered. Carol texted me a single line, "I hope you know what you've done." I did know. That was the entire point. There is a particular silence that settles after 12 years of over-explaining yourself finally stops. I didn't send updates. I didn't post about it. I didn't attend the industry mixer where I knew people would be asking questions. I simply didn't respond to anyone about anything that wasn't strictly operational, and I let 200 guests at that anniversary party draw their own conclusions from my absence at every gathering that followed. Eleanor tried once more at Thanksgiving through my daughter, asking her to talk some sense into her father. My daughter, 20 years old and sharper than anyone gave her credit for, told Eleanor that the only sense that needed talking into anybody was the sense to know the difference between help and the entire operational backbone of a $14 million company. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last conversation anyone in the Harrow family ever had about me directly. After that, I simply stopped being a topic. 11 months after the buyout closed, Harrow Voss Freight Solutions, still Harrow Voss, still my company, still built on 12 years of route software nobody else in that family could have written, posted its most profitable quarter in company history. I renegotiated 3 carrier contracts Richard had left underpriced for years out of a desire to keep everyone comfortable. Comfortable is expensive. I stopped paying for it. I opened a second regional warehouse in a logistics corridor I'd been eyeing since year 6. One Richard had vetoed twice because it required too much risk for too little glory. It became the single highest performing facility in the company within its first 8 months. I bought a lake house of my own that spring. Smaller than the Harrow family's, closer to the water, quieter. I didn't tell anyone I bought it. My daughter found out when I sent her the address for 4th of July. And in October, a trade magazine, the same one that had profiled Richard 8 years earlier and never mentioned my name, ran a feature on the operational restructuring of Harrow Voss Freight Solutions under new sole ownership. The article used my name 11 times. I counted. I used to think loyalty was something you proved by staying quiet, by absorbing every small erasure so the piece could hold one more year. I don't think that anymore. Loyalty that isn't seen isn't loyalty. It's just labor nobody bothered to name. The clause had been sitting in that drawer for 9 years, not because I was waiting to strike, but because I never needed it until the day someone decided out loud, in front of 200 people, that 12 years of my life amounted to little. Some doors you don't need to slam. You just need to know exactly which drawer they're locked in. If the story hit something in you, if you've ever been the one holding the whole operation together while somebody else took the bow, let me know in the comments. Tell me your title. Tell me what they called you instead. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one.